As you can probably tell from the title of this video, my shop is super small. This shop is just over 10 by 12 feet, which makes it smaller than a single car garage. And yet I've managed to stuff some pretty sizable machinery in here, including a 3 horsepower cabinet saw, an edge sander, a 12-inch jointer planer, 14-inch bandsaw, full-size drill press, and everything in between. I moved in here about 6 months ago, and the first thing I did was install 2 new circuits, a 120 volt circuit and a 240 volt circuit. Behind me is a huge mess, and I would like to change that mess one day with a hand tool cabinet like all the cool cats are doing these days, but for now it will remain a huge mess. Beneath that, I have 2 cabinets that I made out of maple, and they're all made with box joints on the drawers and on the case. This is the first cabinet I ever made, and it sports a pretty bad paint job because I didn't know what I was doing and I rushed through it, like most of my projects. The top drawer has my brad nailer and narrow crown stapler. This next drawer has an unorganized array of router bits. This next drawer has tools for working with electronics. And this final drawer has my Dremel and accessories. Next, I have a more up-to-date version, which has the same construction but has full extension drawer slides. Fancy. The top drawer has nitro gloves and some sanding accessories. This next drawer has my random orbit sander with some pads that are more nicely organized than other things. The bottom drawer features an organizer that has some sandpaper in it. This is also where I keep this bin that I made with curly maple to catch the shavings that fell from my jointer that I subsequently sold. Now it is a garbage bin, and a very pretty one. This is my workbench. It's something I slapped together over the course of a weekend with some 2x4s. All I needed was a stout surface to work on, and I had no desire to make some sort of mecca of woodworking. And I would like some more storage and clamping options, so I'm going to be making a new workbench sometime, hopefully this year. This bench features a 10-inch Craftsman quick release vise, which is nice enough. I have some jigs, some blades, a jigsaw that I found on the side of the road, my new DeWalt circular saw, which is lovely, a DeWalt biscuit joiner, and a box of 1,000 biscuits, and a DeWalt compact router. I also lay a floor mat on my bench for less vibrations when sanding, and I keep my box joint jig down here as well. My latest purchase is this Bosch dust extractor, which has proven to be very useful with using a random orbit sander or other hand power tools. The only negative thing I can say about it is that the self-cleaning feature sounds like someone's trying to bust down your front door. This is a random desktop, a laminated pine IKEA desktop that I found on the side of the road one day. I don't have a use for it, and I still don't, so I'm wondering why I have it. I have my apron here. This is a tool chest that doesn't really have much woodworking stuff, but there's some measuring tools, a bunch of pencils, pliers and vice grips, files, zero clearance inserts, wrenches. That's just a big mess. That's what that is. And down here, a Craig jig, jack stands, and an impact wrench for changing my winter tires. This is my bandsaw. It is a standard 14-inch imported Delta clone from probably the early 90s. I paid a whopping $180 for it, and by the time I got it home, I had broken the blade guide. So I purchased a Carter blade guide, which was more expensive than the entire bandsaw. I also broke the rear blade guard, so I made a new one out of wood. And that's what you get for stuffing it into a sedan. Overall, I'm pretty underwhelmed by this bandsaw because it has many problems, including a wobbly bottom wheel. The tires are untrue, and I cannot get proper tension on the blade. Also, it's a 0.5 horsepower, so it's pretty underpowered. What else do I not like about it? Oh yeah, the main thing I don't like about it is that it only has 6 inches of resaw height, and that is entirely inadequate now that I have a 12-inch jointer and I can hardly use it to its full capacity. This is my drill press. It is a Beaver 3700 from probably the 1950s or 40s. It's the oldest tool in my shop. Much like the rest of my tools, my drill press has a bunch of issues, namely the run out at the spindle. I only paid $60 for it, and I spent approximately another $60 on a new chuck and a replacement spindle. This Beaver drill press was also offered in a floor standing model, but this is, I think, what they called the knee height model, because it's not exactly a bench height. If you put this on a bench, it will be far too tall. But this offers the opportunity to have a nice storage cabinet underneath. And a floor standing drill press rarely gets used to its full capacity, and I would rather have a cabinet beneath it for storage. I would like to report that this Lockline dust collection hose has been working out pretty well. It's a bit of an extra step to fire up the dust collector every time you use a drill press, but when you start using Forstner bits and hogging out large holes, it's really nice to collect the dust at the source and not be left with a pile of shavings underneath. Above the drill press, I have an air cleaner very close. There's about a ½ inch of clearance between the drill press and the air cleaner. I know it's not the most ideal position, but really nothing is ideal in this shop. But it's nice to have this when I need it. Beneath my drill press is a cabinet that I made from a pallet that I found on the side of the road. Now, I'm no pallet woodworker, but this one was made of some varieties of exotic hardwoods, and the rails on the skid were full 4 inches by 4 inches. The slats on it were a variety of different other hardwoods. The top was a laminated maple countertop that I also found on the side of the road. In the drawers, well, this used to be where I held my drill and driver, but now there's just a loose array of bits. Down here is more organized drill bits. Here I have a corded drill and a heat gun, and on the bottom is a delightful array of wood screws organized in yogurt cups. This is my edge sander, and I love edge sanders, just not this one. I think I need to change the bearings on it, and as far as edge sanders go, it is a little bit small. The belt is only 80 inches long, and the working platen surface here is about 24 inches. The story on this one goes is I responded to an ad in the classifieds, and I pretty much lowballed him, but he actually accepted my offer, much to my surprise. So I think I paid about $200 on this machine, and I really haven't spent any more money on it since then. This is my clamp rack. It holds all my clamps, which compared to many people on YouTube is not actually a whole lot of clamps, but I make do with what I have. Also, it's where I keep my stereo so I can jam to my tunes. I have two 1 horsepower dust collectors. One resides in the corner between my edge sander and my drill press. This one is connected to those plus the bandsaw, and the ducting comes all the way overhead to be connected with the overhead table saw dust collection and the overhead router dust collection. My other dust collector is in this corner where it goes underneath the router table, underneath the table saw, and underneath the jointer planer, so it can collect those things. I only paid $100 for this dust collector, and this one I got for free with my table saw. I got this one for free because it wouldn't start, so the owner just gave it to me. I thought it was a bad cap, but it turns out that the bearings were so seized up that the motor didn't have enough power to overcome that friction. I almost forgot about my Pantorouter, which I keep behind closed doors in this furnace room because I don't use it often enough to warrant the space that it takes up. I built the Pantorouter based off Matthias Wandel's original plans, and it is a very fun machine to use. It's not the most accurate, but if you're careful with setup, it can get good results. In the top drawer, I have a bunch of follower bearings and templates. And in the cupboard beneath, I have my finishes and glues in nice and easy pull-out shells. This is my table saw. It's the heart of my workshop. I don't like this tool very much either. I put a lot of unnecessary work into it and it still has issues. Namely, the blade has a bit of wobble that I don't like, although it's not terrible. I think it wobbles about 5 thou. There's no riving knife, I know. Do I use a splitter? No, I don't. Should I? I probably should, but I don't. It's a 3 horsepower saw. This design was imported under many different brand names like Grizzly, Busy Bee. This one is a King Industrial. I bought it without a fence and I haggled the previous owner who was closing down a cabinet shop, and I got it for the princely sum of $350, and that was including the free broken dust collector that I repaired. I immediately had to replace the bearings in the arbor, and I think I also did it in the motor as well. Yeah, I did. The motor was completely caked with MDF dust, like just solid. Since it didn't come with a fence, I found this on the classifieds, although it was a brand new fence. Actually, I quite like the fence. It does everything I needed to do and it locks completely straight. I also got a Craig precision miter gauge, which I mostly like, except I find the flip stop wobbles a little bit, which is slightly annoying. Oh, another thing I repaired on it when I got it was the elevation locking. Someone had taken this apart and they removed the brass bullets out of the locking mechanism. So I had to source some new ones of those. What else was wrong with the saw? That was about it, I think. I tend to buy used equipment from industrial cabinet shops that are closing or just don't need it. The Edge Sander was also a shop that was closing down, and that's when you can get really great deals, although you know, you also get what you pay for. It's not like I'm getting really quality cast iron tools here. Most of my tools are imported, 20 to 30 years old, and have been used in industrial settings, which really takes its toll on them, which is why I have to completely disassemble them in some cases and replace all the bearings and do other work as well. After a few months of using this saw, after replacing the bearings, I was starting to get noise again from the arbor, and unfortunately the bearings were destroyed again. I very rarely use a saw. Like, I am barely a weekend warrior at the best of times. So there was something very seriously wrong. So I ended up replacing the arbor, and I actually got a brand new arbor from King Industrial for this exact saw. And yet again, it sounds like the bearings could be going again in the arbor. So it could actually be the part of the trunnion that houses the arbor instead of the arbor itself. I don't know, I'm not putting any more time or effort into this saw because, you know, it doesn't have the features that I want anyway. So I'm just gonna live with it for now, see how much use I can get out of it, and hopefully upgrade to something more ideal in the future. My router table is something I put together quite recently out of a old TV stand and some pine trim. I didn't build this like a ultimate router table, but I just needed something fast because prior to that I was simply using a piece of MDF with my router bolted to it, and then I ended up using that piece of MDF for lifting up my car to change the tires, so I needed something. And I didn't want to spend a whole lot of time making it either. But I like it because the fence has some nice features, like the wings of it open and close around the blade, and I got dust collection on top and underneath. There's no router lift, but the Bosch 1 3/4 horsepower base can be used as a router table lift. It comes even with a wrench that you can use to raise and lower it like that. It does the job. I know what I want for an ultimate router table, but I can't quite do that right now. I wouldn't want to use a wood router anyway. I would use a water-cooled spindle and a cast iron top, and maybe rig the whole thing with stepper motors and an Arduino to automate the whole thing. The rise and fall and the fence in and out would all be on stepper motors. That'd be dope. Lastly, this is my stupid jointer planer. The reason why it is stupid is because I bought it back in November and I am still working on setting it up correctly. Granted, I don't have a whole ton of time to do that, but some evenings I've been able to come down and tinker with it because nothing is able to get in alignment and stay in alignment for that matter. I bought this machine with the intention of saving space, as it is a jointer planer, therefore I don't need two separate tools, and the 12-inch capacity jointer is quite nice. Now, if you see my other video, I'm sure you've noticed that I am in the middle of restoring a different 12-inch jointer. So initially I thought, well, maybe I'll just stick with this one for the space savings, but now that I've had it for as long as I have without being able to use it, I can quite honestly say I regret buying this machine. That is not to say that I won't eventually be able to make it work, but I definitely didn't expect for this to turn into such a massive project. Now, this machine claims it is made in Italy, but it is certainly no SCM. Zinken International, made in Italy, Tecna PFS 300, patented 1987. There's a serial number that says 232, which is pretty low in terms of serial numbers, so not many were made, not many were sold, and I definitely know why, because they just weren't very great machines. It was a pretty knee-jerk purchase on my behalf because I offered $700 for it and I got it. The first problem is that the knives were so impossibly dull that they could not be resharpened. You could actually see the blade curved from where it had worn away. That's how dull it was. It was incredible. So it was a bit of a challenge because the knives were a metric, but they weren't anything standard in metric either. They were 3mm by 17mm by 300mm. Luckily, instead of a metric blade, the imperial equivalent of 1/8 by 3/4 by 12 inch managed to fit just fine. The second problem that I had was that the stock would not feed through the planer, and this is because the infeed and outfeed rollers were completely out of whack. Now, this wasn't because I changed the size of the blades to something slightly different. The rollers were already way out of alignment. So I needed to take the whole cutter head assembly completely apart so I could shim up the infeed and outfeed rollers. When I had put it back together, it still didn't feed in, and that was because that the planer bed looked like it had been machined with a steak knife. Now, most times you can simply put some wax on the planer bed and things will run through quite smoothly, but there was no amount of wax that would help the extremely poorly machined surface. So what I had to do was laminate some ultra high molecular weight UHMW plastic to a piece of MDF to create a very slick and smooth and abrasive resistant surface for the planer. I got this idea from the New Yorkshire Wood Shop. I think that's what it's called. While I had the cutter head apart, I had a good opportunity to replace the bearings because the old ones didn't sound too healthy. When I put it back together, I noticed that there were some alignment issues. Even though I used the same size bearings as before, I think one of them is a little too big, which is causing a bit of excess pressure on it. I noticed it was heating up a little bit, but I'll just see how long it lasts until I have to replace it again, which I will replace it with the size bearing that I think is correct. And even after all that fussing around, I'm still not done yet because the jointer tables are not coplanar. Getting very tired of working on it, and I think once I get it up and running, I'll probably get rid of it. To close off this shop tour, I'd like to leave you with some food for thought. Firstly, it is possible to get pretty large machines into a pretty small space, even in a basement such as my own. Secondly, whenever you hear about someone's good fortune in finding that killer deal, think critically about it and remember those who win the lottery and lose all their money, and in my case, all my time and sanity in costly repairs. Thanks for watching.